Okay. Item number 4, public comments relative to agenda items.
Judy Allen, West Hartford, Connecticut. I'm going to ask for a little bit of latitude. My comments are in anticipation of the district council's report, and I may not be able to stay till the end. So I'm hoping that it will be okay for me to read my comments that I submitted in writing. I'd like you to know about the process throughout the last week that led to the state water plan's failure to be adopted. Last week, there seemed to be no compromise that could be reached about the public trust language. CWWA had offered language that environmental advocates couldn't live with, and environmental advocates had offered language that CWWA couldn't live with. At that point, CWWA refused to discuss anything further, regardless of whether any compromises could be made. The Water Planning Council and the governor were remaining firm that the plan be voted on and adopted as written with no changes. On April 26, following a meeting with the governor, Connecticut Waterworks Association said it was ready to meet with environmental advocates and talk. On April 30th, Rivers Alliance emailed MDC commissioners outlining the process up to that point, but received no reply. MDC commissioners met and passed a resolution directing staff to work for elimination of public trust language, or failing that, to work on a compromise. On Tuesday, May 1st, Betsy Guerra, representing the Connecticut Waterworks Association and the environmental advocates, met and agreed to compromise language. The MDC was not present. Betsy Guerra obtained approval from Connecticut Waterworks Association and others in her coalition, including the Connecticut Council of Municipalities and the Connecticut Conference of Small Towns. A letter was prepared to the Water Planning Council announcing the agreement, but apparently CWWA coalition member CBIA had not been fully apprised of the events. Connecticut Business and Industry Association Representative Eric Brown objected that corporations, farmers, and golf managers were being ignored. Reportedly, Senator Len Fasano agreed to that and killed any chances of a compromise session. I hope the irony of this is not lost. The first ever state water plan costing $1 million for development for over a year, in the end was blocked, not because of public trust language, but by interests who felt left out and not consulted. The degree of support from the MDC for the compromise or support for the opposition is not known. I hope you, the board, ask staff what position they advocated for. Did they fulfill the direction you gave them last week when you adopted your resolution? The public has a right to know how staff implemented your resolution. The good news is that the state water plan is not dead. It will return the next legislative session, and between now and then, I hope the compromise language can be supported by all. Thank you.
Is there further comment relative to agenda items? If not, generally we don't respond to this issue, but I feel it's imperative that we...
I'll do it in my comments.
Okay. The chief legal counsel, the basis of the testimony is factually sort of, it's not factual, so we'll respond to it in the commissioner, in the chief legal counsel's remarks. Approval of minutes of the meeting of April 30th, 2018.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Are there any additions or deletions? If not, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Item number 6, I will yield to the Well, to the chief executive officer, then to the chief legal counsel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have two items that I want to highlight for my report tonight. The first one is we gave an update to the Committee on Finance just a little while ago. I just want to update, we do have Cone Resnick here. I mentioned Rob Constable, who has resigned from the MDC effective April 20th. We immediately, upon Rob's notification to myself, we brought in Cone Resnick to help us finish the audit, also to help us close the financial books monthly and quarterly, and then also help us assess the needs of the finance department, both in staffing and vacancies, and help develop internal controls moving forward for the future. So I do have, they were here tonight and spoke at the Board of Finance. Lisa Gatone and Melissa Ferrucci are here. In the interest of time, if you could just come up and introduce yourself and explain what you are doing for us, that way you don't have to wait for the final.
Sure. Good evening. I'm Lisa Cantone with Cone Resnick. I'm here with my colleague Melissa Ferrucci. We were brought in on April 2nd. We've been working in the Director of Finance capacity with him during the 3 weeks that he was here through his departure on April 20th. We have divided the project that we're doing really into two phases. As Scott mentioned, the first phase is really trying to get through the year-end audit with your outside audit firm, Bloom Shapiro. We've been working with the internal staff and just closing down open items as it relates to the year-end audit process. We would expect to have a draft financial statement from Bloom Shapiro within the next week or so. The second thing that we're doing is working on the monthly closes for January and February of 2018. Those monthly closes are done and posted. We expect to complete the March close by the middle of this week. We will then be meeting with John Zinzarella, the CFO, to review the first quarter results. In addition, we have been just on site really with a team of about 5 people on a rotating basis. We're answering general accounting questions from the finance department. I am also part of the committee that is interviewing for the new director of finance. We have interviewed 6 candidates thus far. We have 1 remaining to interview this week, and then I will be providing comments back along with the rest of the committee to Scott and his team. The second phase of the project, as Scott mentioned, is really to go through the internal controls, policies, and procedures, assess the current staff and open positions, and just work within the parameters to get a process that is a little bit more cohesive and collaborative with the entire team. So we expect to be here for the next several months. We will also assist with transitioning the new director of finance into that position as well.
Great. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you.
And we are meeting, Lisa is really, at this point, acting, Cone Resnick is acting as the Director of Finance with her staff, just providing an extension of support to the existing NBC employees. So they're doing a great job for us, and the employees are very thankful that they're here. We will plan in the future to utilize firms like Cone Resnick to help us during the auditing process, because it's a skill set that is unique, and it is a great need on the behalf of the MDC staff to help get through the audit process timely. So I just wanted you to have a chance to see and hear from them as to what they've been doing for us. Hopefully within the next couple of weeks, we will have a final candidate selected and hopefully have identified that individual. The only other thing I wanted to talk about, and I mentioned in PP&I, is we were very happy that we are successful in developing a tentative agreement with all 3 unions. We've been talking about this for a number of months now. The contract ends January of 19. Our goal has been, as we know, we're going to be hiring approximately 200 to 300 staff in the next 2 to 3 years. It's very important to get a new agreement with the unions that we can limit our liability for the future, specifically pension and OPEB, retirement medical. So we have developed an agreement very similar to what you have approved for the E&E population. And we have a tentative agreement. They signed it on May 4th. They're planning to vote on the tentative agreement in the mid-May timeframe, 15th, 16th, 18th. As soon as that vote occurs and they ratify the agreement, we will be able to start to hire new employees, unionized employees under the new agreement. This is going to save approximately $45 million of liability alone in the OPEB, the retiree medical alone, which will help plan for the future and plan for the ability for the MDC to provide benefits to its employees that we desperately need to. So that's really it, and I have nothing else to say.
Okay. Are there any questions? Let me just make one thing clear. The new employees will be replacement employees basically for what we have on staff now. This isn't an expansion of 200 employees. So, so it's carried properly and correctly. I just want to clarify that issue. Denise?
On a different note, I just wondered whether you had an update on where we are in the process with a consultant looking at the ad valorem project.
John, where are we?
We've provided the data to them. We had a phone conference with the towns probably 2 weeks ago, and the next step is a workshop with the consultant and the towns. But right now they have the data, they're starting to go through it, and they're going to get back to us with anything else they need further, and that's where we are.
Thank you.
Alan?
Yeah, just, I wish the folks from Cone Resnick hadn't left, but that's okay, because I can sort of get my answer, I think. We, normally we would have our chief financial officer with us, and for whatever reason he's not, that's not a problem. However, we're sort of in this no man's land without a finance director who's in transition, again, all fine and dandy. But my question is, we're at a point in our calendar where we not only close out what we've done previously, but we start to move ahead with plans for budgeting for next year. And so without this finance director, we're sort of at a loss. But if we have questions, board members, if board members have questions for finance that would normally have gone to the finance director, is it assumed that we would just contact Cone Resnick, or do we do this through the CFO?
Go through CFO.
CFO. You go. John is on the phone. John is
Oh,
on.
okay.
John is on the
I didn't
phone.
hear.
But yes, you would go through John. The details would be if you look at Cone Resnick as simply acting as the director of finance and working with the staff. Any financial questions you have, you can go to John, and we can get you any answers you need.
Okay, very good.
This is John Zinzer. I'm on the phone. I'm listening in.
Thank you, John.
Okay.
Ray?
Yeah, I'd just like to thank Scott and Bob on the union contract. The 24 years I've been here, this is the best contract. This is what we had to do. It doesn't hurt any existing employees, but we get the HSA, we get rid of that $48 million liability over the next 30 years as retirees pass away. It's going to take a while, but that liability goes away. We're not going to be adding to it. So, Scott, thank you. And Bob. He's still here. Yeah, Bob's still here.
Further questions? If not, report from district council?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple of things. First, the Patsoid class action litigation. There was, that involves the claimed overcharges for surcharges for people in non-member towns. There was a 30-day extension granted again
as we try to get our arms around, first of all, the insurance coverage and some issues that are related to that. Secondly, whether this should go to complex litigation or not. And thirdly, we have not yet decided on who will represent us on this. We're looking for very specific expertise regarding the class actions. So I will have a more complete report, which we can do in executive session the next time around, in which we'll give you a more detailed legal analysis of our position and the coverage issues. Secondly, Senate Bill 415 is a bill that would mandate that the state, if funds are available, pay 80% rather than 50% of projects which are subject to a consent decree. That would include the Clean Water Project. That would mean millions upon millions of dollars for the 8-member towns, and would more fairly distribute the $2 billion program that we're doing, which impacts the Connecticut River, which then impacts the Long Island Sound, and is a tremendous benefit to everyone. That bill, which was voted favorably out of committee, is currently with the Finance Committee. Anything that any of you can do to contact the Finance Committee to urge approval of Senate Bill 415 would be greatly appreciated. That's Senate Bill 415, and it's the 80-20 bill. The other areas of legislative interest is there was a bill that raised concern last week in which it was going to have PURA control all charges related to sewer usage. That bill, we had discussions with PURA, and it had been drafted so broadly it would have included the MDC. They specifically put in language to take out the MDC. So we were successful in our discussion of that bill. As you know, we do not report to PURA under anything, and it would lead to untold complications relating to the district towns, for one thing, and the ad valorem charges. Finally, as to the state water plan, a couple things. You remember from our special meeting last week, there was some suggestion that environmental organizations weren't really included when we drafted the state water plan. I would tell you that, first of all, the Water Planning Council is OPM, which is represented by David Lavasseur, and then has most recently been represented by Michael Sullivan. DEEP, the Environmental Protection, which was originally represented by Michael Sullivan and is now represented by Betsy Wingfield, PURA, Jack Betkowski, and the Department of Public Health, Lori Matthew. Assisting that group was the steering committee, which I sat on, but on that steering committee was Ellen Katz, the Consumer Council, Dr. Gene Likens, an environmental professor from UConn, Margaret Miner, who addressed you last week from Rivers Alliance, and David Sutherland, who is with the Nature Conservancy. Clearly environmental groups. The Advisory Council, which continues in existence today, the steering committee ended last September, has Margaret Miner as the co-chair from the Rivers Alliance, Karen Bernasta from the Endangered Land Coalition, Len DeYoung of the Pomerog Watershed Coalition, and Richard Sabluski from the Consumer Advocate. A statement was made that the public trust language is not what has caused the delay now with the state water plan. That is just not correct. The reason there is a problem with the state water plan right now is that the public trust language was inserted into the state water plan executive summary and also into the plan itself after a year and a half of work done by all of these various committees, all of these various interests, and no mention of public trust. Most of concern is that public trust was inserted in a way that ordered the Water Planning Council to consider public trust and no other statutes relating to water use in relationship to balancing the difference between environmental, commercial, and residential uses of water. That was objected to immediately by water companies and the CWWA, of which the MDC is only a part. We are not driving the bus on that. The CWWA, which is the Connecticut Water Works Association, offered language that said, look, if you're going to reference balancing, consider all of the statutes, not just one statute that says that there is a public trust, and further define what you mean by public trust. The reason that CWWA was concerned was that in the comments, and there were not thousands of comments, there were 37 comments total, Lori Brown of the Connecticut League of Conservation Voters, in advocating for public trust, said that the water plan should review all registered diversions. Now, I mentioned to you last week, in 1982, when diversion regulations and the diversion law and the Clean Water Act was first implemented, we were granted a registered diversion for use of the water which we had created in these various reservoirs. The League of Conservation Voters, in accordance with their view of public trust, wanted a review of all registered diversions and was particularly concerned about diverting water from the Farmington River and sending it to Yukon. Well, any of you who were here during the Yukon issue knows that we were not planning on diverting water from the Farmington River and sending it to Yukon. The water was going to come from the reservoirs of the MDC and be sent to Yukon. They claim further, the League of Conservation Voters, that Niagara, because they're selling outside the water basin, they should have to get an interbasin transfer. Now, what that would mean is that any water company like Niagara would have to get a diversion permit, which is a costly and lengthy process. If it's Niagara required to do that for water transfer, question, who else would have to do it? Okay, water is used in breweries, it's used in Coca-Cola, Pequot sells water outside their water basin. I think it's fair to say, what do you mean by that? What are the limits on what you're suggesting? Lou Birch, who also works for an environmental group, in discussing public trust, in his comments specifically said that all registered diversions should be reviewed. That basically would mean that the water that you think that you have to sell to the public, you very well might not have, even though there is no issue whatsoever about whether you're meeting your safe yield or there's any danger to the public whatsoever. So those are the issues that are raised by bringing up something like public trust at the end of a process and not discussing it. It is way beyond, I agree that it is with Ms. Allen, that it is way beyond an issue of the MDC and CWWA. I would like to correct, though, the issue about, in her letter, that says there was language that came from the environmental community as a compromise. There wasn't any language from the environmental community offered as a compromise. And the governor, when he said that he was remaining firm with the plan,
No
meant that there
compromise.
could be no changes within the plan, and that you either accept public trust, ill-defined as it is, or you bear the consequences of opposing the governor. On April 26th, the CWWA had said that they are still willing to talk, and they did. It is true that on April 30th, Rivers Alliance sent us a memorandum, but we received it immediately prior to the board meeting that we had. So there was no opportunity to respond to it. And I believe we tried to respond to Rivers Alliance and Margaret at that meeting. And we did say that we would continue to work towards a compromise. We did participate, and we're fully aware of what Betsy Guerra and CWWA proposed as compromise language. The problem is, as those of you familiar with the legislature know, when you get towards the end of a session and there are many and diverse groups that are affected by legislation, a change as major as, you might lose registered diversions, or you might lose the ability to control the water that you have on a golf course, or you might lose control of the water you're using for your farm.
Or your well.
Yeah, or your well in both residential and a business. There are all sorts of different groups that the CBIA and others represent that we don't control in any way, who have problems with that. And they want clear definition before they're going forward. So, I mean, it's easy to characterize somebody as being obstructive or trying to defeat the plan, when in fact, all of these groups had signed off on the plan as it was drafted before the public trust was put into it. It was the insertion of the public trust that caused all the problems with all these groups. So as we stand here today, we did do what we said we would do, and we tried to work with everybody and tried to come up with a compromise. The compromise, which might have been acceptable to us, was not acceptable to other groups that have serious concerns about the insertion of that language, like CBIA, like the farmers group, like the golf courses. And we can't control that. So as we stand here today, unfortunately, I would be surprised if a compromise could be reached at this late date, although, as Senator DeBella well knows, lots of times the short time left brings clarity to people, and you're able to reach compromises. But it's going to be difficult. We have done what we can, as I unequivocally stated in front of the state water plan last Friday. The MDC is in favor of having a state water plan. We want a state water plan which is clear and in which rights are known, and that there are, and not try to figure it out at a later date. So that's where we are right now. We'll keep you advised if there are any developments. Attorney Fox is over at the legislature right now, but it appears unlikely, which means that it'll be up to next year to adopt a state water plan in the legislature if they can't get it done in the next 2 days. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions? Andy?
Pardon, who brought this into the equation at the 11th hour like that? Who was responsible for this?
Well, there were comments by people in the environmental community, which was their right to do. I mean, there was a comment period. But then Mr. Sullivan, on behalf of OPM, was his hat at that point, raised the issue and inserted the language. And it was eventually agreed to by the other Water Planning Council members.
Well, to be more specific, OPM made the recommendation, DEEP representative voted for it, Department of Public Health voted for it, there were 4 members on, what is that, the,
Jack Bekowski for
and
Pure.
Jack Bukowski from Pura. So the intrusion of the language after the vote was done by the administration relative to that issue. And remember, there was a directive given to the water plan by the General Assembly, and the whole question of public trust was not articulated in that. And they proceeded through that process, and the discussions took place without public trust in there. So much so that the legislature, when it came back and went to committee, required that there be no changes by the committees of the legislature. Obviously, the legislature itself could not be bound by that language, and they had the right to amend. So I think you had here a situation where something was put into a plan after a plan had been developed, and really developed by a pretty broad spectrum of people. When that happened, you had a response from not only water companies, but the business community in general. I think CBIA speaks fairly loudly for what the Connecticut business community believes, and a whole series of other broad spectrum of representation in the state of Connecticut, people that are very concerned with jobs and the ability of this economy to move forward as it's sort of stalled relative to the rest of the country. So it was a very controversial injection of a piece of language that could not be defined at that point in time. People become very uncomfortable when they can't define what is being proposed, whether you're in a city council or whether you're in a high school group or you're in the Connecticut State General Assembly. But that's a strategic decision that apparently someone made, and now people are trying to blame everybody but themselves to try to do it. And all I can say is that in the General Assembly, when you've got 3 days left and you've got a controversial piece of legislation that will be definitely termed in legislative language a talker, it will have a problem, because one member of the Connecticut State Senate could stand up and continue to filibuster that, and no one gets what they want down to the last. So you can understand the temperament and also the rationale of the legislature. If you wait for the last 3 days to bring up a very controversial issue, it goes to bed. Leadership doesn't bring it up for discussion. So we just wanted to put in perspective what happened in fact. And our representatives were at all these meetings where there was proposal for a compromise, and we try to work with everybody else in that process. So that's it. Denise?
Can you give an example of what type of compromise language we would have been okay with?
Yeah, the proposal by the Connecticut Waterworks Association said, included still language related to public trust in the balancing, but also referenced other statutes that referred to the use of water for commercial, residential, and other purposes, so that it would be a balancing of not just the environmental purpose, but all the other purposes too, which is really what the current law is.
Thank you.
And we did not oppose that issue, if there could be a compromise.
But we did not. The fear would be, again, if you just leave the environmental reference in there, you could end up very easily with people requiring diversion permits for basically any new utilization of water, and it could affect the registration, and which means when you affect the registration, it affects your rights related to the waters that are contained in the reservoir. So certainly a decision like that is far above my pay grade here, and would have to be something that everybody here would have to decide if you wish to somehow give up that right.
Buddy?
Bart, in reading some, some of the issues that came to us about this particular issue, we haven't mentioned anything about the effect that language might have had on riparian rights and on the whole idea
The
that
whole law.
for as long as, maybe even before Connecticut had a constitution, recognized riparian rights, and it seemed to me that the idea of public trust was a pretty expansive idea that could affect something as sacred as riparian rights. So I'm not sure it ever got discussed, and I'm not sure if there was an analysis of the effect that might be if that was performed by anyone, by the legislative commissioner's office or whoever does those things. I'm not sure if that was ever responded to, if the question was brought up. I'm just curious.
I did mention last week that there was, in California decisions, they found that riparian rights were overruled by public trust. And so that that possibility could occur in Connecticut if you do this without better defining what you mean by public trust and what the hierarchy of rights are. Now, there was a proposal by Senator Kennedy that suggested that the issue of public trust be put into the state constitution. That was advanced in just this last week, but it would go beyond water and relate to really land, air, everything. And my understanding is that's not really going anywhere. It's just...
Well, they got PT'd in a very strange way. But I just thought that it would be really important to, for instance, the city of New Britain, with respect to its rights to riparian rights that we have to deal with from the Farmington River and so forth. So I don't know if that never got into a discussion, and I just don't understand how these things can get that far along where it can get in front of the legislature without any analysis of what the effect of this stuff might be.
Well, I will tell you that the Water Planning Steering Committee met for 2 years and discussed all sorts of things. We never discussed the relationship of riparian rights to public trust because public trust was never on the agenda.
That was
So-
obviously injected at the last moment, so you couldn't have
Right,
discussed.
so there was nothing from the LCO, there's nothing from the Attorney General, there's nothing from the Steering Committee, there's nothing from the Policy Committee, there's nothing as we're heading into this to define what you mean by public trust and what is the practical significance of that. How does it impact the existing uses of water, and how does it relate to things such as registrations, diversion permits, the sale of water, the use of water by people in products. There's just nothing. And it is disappointing that after we spent all that time trying to come up with something we could agree to, we get something which, as you point out, needs significant discussion before and complete understanding by all parties of at least what you mean. And you can either win or lose, depending on it. But to go forward not knowing what you mean is really irresponsible.
Well, I think the naivety issue isn't a legitimate argument. The 4 people that sat on that board that made the recommendation for the insertion were very cognizant of what the legislative process is. And to submit something like that after it had been agreed to by there was an agreement on that committee, by the committee on the plan, was really a risky situation, especially without public hearings and a whole lot of other, and especially without the direction of the General Assembly. So, let's please put it in perspective relative to what happened and not come here and lecture the MDC because they didn't make it pass. I mean, we participated in it, we supported it, but there was a very broad spectrum of the Connecticut public and special interests. That's what the legislature and this democracy is all about, that had no temperament for that piece of insertion. So that's what's that.
And Mr. Chairman, if we're done with that, I have one other thing. I've asked Nick Salemi to come tonight because we received a lot of questions about the type of outreach that the MDC does. And Nick is in charge of a program where we send speakers out to various organizations and show them this 5-minute video, which I asked permission to show, Mr. Chairman, just to show you the types of presentations that we're doing.
Are there further questions? Nick, for 5 minutes?
This is the story of water. Hartford's Metropolitan District Commission, the MDC. It's the story of a community that had the vision to invest in a water system and that would safeguard its viability for more than a century. And how that vision has ensured an abundance of water as the economic lifeblood of our region. The story of water in the Hartford region begins and ends with the Connecticut River. In the beginning, Hartford took its drinking water from the river, but by the mid-1800s, taking drinking water from the polluted Connecticut River created health risks and threatened the area's economic viability. So they created a series of small reservoirs in West Hartford, but by the turn of the century, these small reservoirs couldn't keep up with the demands of the growing city. Enter the MDC, who had the very best engineers in America, and used that genius to design and build a gravity-fed water system that was brilliantly conceived.
Everything has to work together in order to get the water from point A at the reservoirs through the treatment plants into the distribution system to someone's faucet.
This is the story of big dams, deep reservoirs, and huge sandbag filters. The two main MDC surface reservoirs were built to withstand drought. When full, they store nearly 40 billion gallons of water. So much water that if no rain were to fall for a year and a half, the MDC would still be able to supply its customers. But the sheer volume of the MDC reservoirs is only half the story. Attention to detail every step of the way makes MDC's Class AA water one of the purest and highest quality waters anywhere.
To make sure that the water is pure and clean when people turn on the tap, it's an amazing amount of work, actually.
It starts with location. The upland location of the MDC large surface reservoirs means they are less exposed to potential pollution or impurity. In addition, the 31,000 acres of protected watershed means MDC water quality and quantity benefits from the natural filtration of pristine and expansive forest lands. Even though the water in the reservoirs is of high quality, it is filtered and processed both for home and commercial use. It's a system that reliably supplies nearly 400,000 customers with almost 50 million gallons every day, with the water being constantly monitored for the highest quality every step of the way. The first line of defense against any microorganisms or impurities are the sand filters in West Hartford and Bloomfield. The large sand filters are an incredibly simple but effective idea. It's actually very similar to rain falling on the ground. The slow sand filters in West Hartford are the largest sand filters in North America. A few miles away in Bloomfield, the Reservoir 6 plant uses a more conventional rapid sand filtration. Before the water is sent out, it is tested and treated. pH is adjusted. The water is disinfected with minimal amounts of additives. And because every glassful must be perfect, daily samples are tested multiple times every step of the way, with redundancy built into the system to ensure uninterrupted supply. And the MDC provides another benefit for its customers: recreation on some of its lands, a wildlife habitat, hiking, a place of beauty and serenity, just to get away from it all. And the Farmington River would not be a big and powerful river and such a great trout stream if the MDC didn't manage the water levels all year long, releasing a minimum of 32 million gallons of water per day. Prior to the MDC's Goodwin Dam, the natural flows of the Farmington River were significantly lower. So, there it is, the MDC story of bringing an abundant supply of pure, clean water to Connecticut. A multi-level approach combining high water quality sources surrounded by expansive watershed that both protects and purifies pristine reservoirs and finished off with comprehensive testing and minimal treatment.
Our job is to be as smart and plan for the next 100 years. And it's a huge task. The challenges are larger, the regulatory issues are much greater, but we have to maintain this gem, this jewel that was built for us, and we have to take care of it and improve it for the next generation.
Thank you, Nick, and that reminds me, Kerry, we have a scheduled tour of the facilities again, don't we? June 7th. If you haven't done it, I would really encourage you.
It's
Go on that.
a day's experience that you'll remember. Further questions? Just let Carrie know if you've got an interest in attending. That's the 7th of June. Item 9, Board of Finance consideration and potential action regarding debt insurance resolution for general obligation bonds, issuance of up to $120 million in general obligation bonds. Recommended action, receive the report and adopt the resolution. Is there a motion to? It's been moved and seconded.
Good evening, Mr. Chair. Joe Vitale, Bond Counsel to the District. The District has $120 million in general obligation bond anticipation notes coming due August 1st. The resolution before you would permanently finance those for a period of up to 30 years. The final maturities will be in the discretion of the Chair and of the District Treasurer. And the sale will be on a negotiated basis, as staff believes it requires the services of an underwriter to tell the story in light of concerns that the market may have about Hartford and the state of Connecticut. And lastly, there are some $39 million or so in unspent proceeds from the note issue as a result of projects either being slow or on hold. So we may be back to you next month with some reallocations to other projects.
Questions?
Mr. Chairman, this resolution passed unanimously earlier this evening at the Board of Finance.
Is there further discussion? If not, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Item number 10. 10. Water Bureau consideration of and potential action regarding specifications of benches on MDC watershed land. There is a favorable committee report and an amendment from the Water Bureau. Is there a motion to adopt the amendment? I'm sorry, is there a motion to adopt the resolution? It's been moved and seconded. Is that inclusive? It's inclusive of an amendment. So without objection to the amendment, well, let's take the amendment up. Is there a motion for the amendment?
So moved.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there discussion? Who's going to second it? Who wants to?
I'll second.
No, who wants to discuss the amendment? What's the amendment?
Committee tonight, there's no problem.
Oh, there it is. There's Ray. Okay.
Yeah, it went through committee tonight, and it was, the specifications were approved by the committee. We had two people that had requested benches. We amended the motion to allow them, as long as they're agreeable to the specifications, they can move ahead right away. And we'll be working with Tom, right? we'll be working with them to make sure the locations are approved by staff.
Is it the locations, or is it the specifications of the amendment? Is the
Specifications and exactly where they're gonna be. You're gonna work with them to make sure that, they can't just put them anywhere. It's gotta be approved by
They'll
our
work with our
staff.
staff.
They agree to that, the two individuals that have.
I know the standards are part of the resolution. Are there any further, is there any further discussion on the amendment? If not, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Discussion is on the main motion as amended. Is there further discussion on the main motion as amended? If not, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Item 11, Personnel and Pension Insurance Committee, consideration and potential action, job classification revisions. There's two. A, water waste plant operator trainee. Recommended action is receive the report and adopt the resolution. Is there a motion to adopt?
So moved.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there discussion?
Mr. Chairman, this was adopted unanimously at the PP&I committee meeting.
Thank you, Commissioner. Further discussion? If not, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Item B, Utility Maintenance Crew Leader. Recommended action, receive the report and adopt the resolution. Is there a motion?
So moved.
It's been moved and seconded. Commissioner Taylor?
That was approved unanimously in the PP&I meeting earlier today. If there were any questions, Mr. Zeig can provide any needed information or answer any questions.
And no questions? Okay. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Motion passes. Item 12, Committee on MDC Government, consideration of potential action regarding revision to SSW 2A, payment of water bills. Recommended action, receive the report and adopt the resolution. Is there a motion to adopt?
Move it.
Moved and seconded. Commissioner Sweezy? Isn't it the water? I'm sorry, government.
I'm not on government.
Who's doing government? It passed government unanimously. Any questions? If not, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? B, revision of B3I, Committee on MDC Government. Recommended action, receive the report and adopt the resolution. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved and seconded. This also was adopted by unanimous consent in the Government Committee.
Yes.
Any questions? If not, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Item 13, opportunity for general public comments. Opportunity for...
Judy Allen, West Hartford. Want to clarify a question. The compromise language that was proposed would have eliminated the text for the public trust statute. It would respect public input by saying that there was a statute about public trust. I believe there was 12 other statutes that were also going to be referenced, including the one first brought forward by CWWA, and any language indicating a relationship between public trust and balance was removed. So the question still is, does the MDC support this language? And if so, will you continue to support this compromise through the process for the next legislative session? The reason the plan can no longer move forward now is that the committees cannot just amend the plan on their own. Any changes have to be voted on by the Water Planning Council. I believe the agreement had been made with the Water Planning Council to have an emergency meeting to vote on compromised language, but there's no longer time for that to happen. Thank you.
Answer your own question. Don?
Mr. Chairman, not a question, but I just wanted Bart and everyone else to know that the Finance Committee at the state level hasn't voted out Senate Bill 415 yet, but the chairman has indicated that he's going to move the language to the bond bill, which is a much safer vehicle, so that's good news.
Yep. Thank you, Don. Opportunity for general public comments. Are there any further public comments? 14, commissioners' questions and comments. Comment?
Mr. Chairman, I would like to thank West Hartford Public Access TV for recording the district's meetings and thank the MDC for allowing that. I believe it'll help members of the district better understand what's happening at the MDC. I'd like to know, understand how these tapes are getting distributed to the 8-member towns for each town's viewing. And I believe that'll lead to improving the MDC's public relations. Also, is there other MDC information, videos? For instance, the video that was played for us today. That would be an excellent piece excellent piece that could be sent to the 8-member towns to be put on community public access TV. Whatever ways that we can do to promote the MDC. And lastly, is it possible to have a discussion on public relations at our future meetings to discuss what is being done and what could possibly be done in the future to help our customers understand all the great things that the MDC is doing?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Salemi can answer some of those questions.
Go ahead.
Sure, Commissioner. As far as the community access, so West Hartford tapes it, they post it online, they give us a digital copy, we post it online, our own website, and have forwarded out to the 7 other member towns if they want to do it. I know Newington has actually taken it and aired it and has dates scheduled. I haven't heard from the rest of them yet, but that they have all been given a link to it so they can post it themselves.
Fantastic, thank you.
And as far as that video and others like it, they're all posted on our YouTube, our own page, but we do forward it around as part of e-blast, and member town, like elected officials and other folks, are including our customers and a giant e-blast list, get it as well.
And we have given these videos, the full versions of them, to the town.
Those are actually, that's a pared down version of a longer 45-minute documentary. So the longer ones that have been sent out to all the member towns and have been played on public access as well as on CPTV across the whole state.
There's 2 additional longer. This one was on water, the other one is on wastewater.
Correct.
So that we do have a significant, we provide them to schools and everybody else. It's a disc that we will provide at no charge to our customer base. Commissioner?
Hartford Public Access Television, have you contacted them?
Yes, I have. Forwarded
Okay,
to them.
good, because they'll be happy to show it too. Okay.
And Commissioner, to your question on the communications, we received something from the national organization today that there's going to be a specific meeting in July in Chicago of all the various water companies in the United States, meeting to discuss communications and communication strategies. And Mr. Jolliston's going to have whoever he designates to go to that. So we will continue with that, and we can, in the next meeting, provide further information as to what we're doing anyway.
That's good to hear. Thank you very much.
Commissioner, did you have your hand up?
Yes, I did. I just wanted to follow up on the question. So what's being taped right now, or being taped by West Hartford, that's being provided to the community access channels of our communities?
Yes.
By the
Commissioner
way,
Sweezy and Denise.
I want to make another comment too to follow up. That was That was a great 4-minute presentation.
Thank you, Senator.
Nick, Community Affairs, the subcommittee. At one time, do we still have a public relations consultant, full-time?
We do.
Because at one time, we had a
in the
person.
process of
We
changing
we used to have a consultant. I don't know if we still pay him, but
We do.
he came in front of a Community Affairs years ago.
That's usually where we do
So that might
it.
be a good idea at the next meeting,
Sure.
if we still have that person.
Yep.
The consultant, not you.
Yep.
To come in.
Sure.
And that's where, questions could be asked on what he's doing and.
Well, that should be at the public, Community Affairs.
That's what I'm
Committee.
saying, do it at Community Affairs where we
Yeah.
did it before.
That's in, Don, that's the place we should do it, right. Further questions? I'm sorry, Denise.
No, just a suggestion that, I find in West Hartford, a lot of people have no idea about the tunnel that's being built 200 feet below ground. And so maybe there's some opportunity to also give some presentation on the update and where the progress is on that tunnel, and some pictures to show what's actually happening down there would be welcome too.
We're scheduling those right now for all 8 towns. We're in the process right now.
And have we
Correct.
put the video of the tunnel?
We do. We have a video with the tunnel construction,
That's on
the
our website
graphics.
now.
Correct.
We get an awful lot of question and concern because a lot of people are very excited about the technical aspects of drilling 220 feet below ground with a tunnel, and how it works. It's not very labor intense because the machine basically does it. The labor is taking the stone and muck out in conveyor belts and putting them in trucks and taking them away. So it's not a real, it's very technologically innovative.
We're going to be presenting in any of the towns. The commissioners will know ahead of time where we're going to be, time, place, all that.
And we are planning in the July, August timeframe to have a groundbreaking. The project already started, obviously, but they're in the process of caverning out. The 30-foot drop shaft, which is 250 feet deep, is completed. They're actually caverning out about a 400-foot horizontal shaft for the tunnel machine to actually be dropped down into the hole. So we are going to have a groundbreaking launching the machine in the late July, August timeframe, and everyone will be invited, include all the dignitaries and the regulators as well.
Further questions, comments? Just before we leave, I think you to watch, if you haven't seen it, the documentary on water, because it really is the history of Hartford. It's the growth of Hartford. It's the dynamic ability of a community to grow and how significant this is to it. But it also outlines and demonstrates the billions, not millions, the billions of dollars since 1913, actually going back to 1846 when we built our first reservoir in West Hartford. How much money has been expended by the people of Hartford and the Hartford region after the war as it grew to the commitment of this city, and it's in the billions of dollars. And to prevent flooding on the Farmington River, to provide safety on that river, and the significance is none of our drinking water comes out of that. It comes out of the 85 square mile watershed that we created up there, and then created a whole series of compensating reservoirs where we take water out of the river to put back and maintain stream flow. And at 32 million gallons a day, every day, it's a significant portion and a significant cost factor that a whole lot of people over several generations move forward on, and it was paid for by those people. And MDC, by the way, is a public trust. 1929, it was established by the General Assembly, and I want to say, maybe not bragging, but to point out that they've done a pretty darn good job in terms of what they've done here. So, and it's our responsibility as commissioners, voluntary commissioners, to maintain that. That's what the job of this board is, this public trust. If there are no further comments, I will entertain the appropriate resolution. Stands adjourned.